And welcome back to the Blanket Coverage Podcast. Today we got episode 309. We're going to be talking about college football week 7, giving our winners and losers, and of course picking next week's quite frankly awful slate of games, which means one thing, and that's that some top 10 team is probably going to go down. I'm Noah Parker. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Jack Wallace. And Jack, let's kick it off. Who won this weekend?
Well, if we're going to dive right into it, I love talking about our winners and losers. We've been doing it every week. If you're new to the podcast, that's how this works. We round up our top winners, our top losers, and we all go through on who we think are the big dogs here in college football. But to start things off, we have a new kid on the block as my first winner, and it's Caleb Williams. Now, if you haven't heard of Caleb Williams before, then you better turn on your TV because this kid has been running wild up there in Norman, Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Sooners looked like they were finally starting to crack a little bit with the once-star quarterback Spencer Rattler pretty much falling apart is the best way to put it, putting up very mediocre stats and not living up to any of the hype that he was preseason. But Oklahoma keeps winning because they still have all these 5 stars in their pockets, and we know that Lincoln Riley's smart enough to use them, as he's doing here, because Caleb Williams has been pretty elite so far, even in only a few showings. So pretty impressive here by Caleb Williams out of Oklahoma. It was a 52-31 victory this week over TCU, which was painful, yet expected. So it's not like we had any hope TCU was going to win this game. Again, I know we talked about it last episode of where we both were hammering Oklahoma money line on this game, which was not particularly shocking. But I do have to say, though, gotta say here as a bit of a nod, Max Duggan can throw the dang ball now. And I'll give him that because in this game, 346 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks, and a 67% accuracy. It really wasn't that bad. We know that's been a big struggle for him in nearly every game, and I did not expect this.
I think it's slightly misleading because he had to throw the ball a lot. No Zach Evans in this game,
but it still was good. 300 yards
to throw the ball. But again, against 2 freshman cornerbacks at Oklahoma, with the talent that they have receiver, he should be doing this every single game and against better defenses as well.
Which is why I'm happy he did it this game. That's what I'm saying. Like, I know it should be more consistent. But
I don't think this is necessarily a step forward for Duggan. I think it's a good game, but I wouldn't necessarily go as far as calling it a step forward. We'll get to TCU later. I've got some comments. I specifically do want to focus on the TCU side of things in this game. But no, this was a great effort from Caleb Williams. We saw today big drama as Spencer Rattler removed the University of Oklahoma from his Instagram bio. And I don't know how to tell Oklahoma fans, specifically Lincoln Riley, this, but Spencer Rattler ain't playing another down for the Sooners. That's just out of the picture. He will enter the transfer portal immediately as soon as he can, unless, Lincoln Riley's got some booster paying him off in the background while he sits and waits for the end of the season and to hear about some team and roster openings. But yeah, Spencer Rattler ain't playing another down for this team. 66 yards on the ground for Caleb Williams. That's an element that Spencer Rattler just did not bring to the table as an explosive rushing threat. 7.3 yards a carry. But the story of this game, other than Caleb Williams, continues to be TCU's inability to stop the run whatsoever, allowing 7.7 yards a carry to Kennedy Brooks, who is a great running back. I'm not saying that Kennedy Brooks should not be running for that on you, but it's been every single week, multiple 100-yard rushers, if not a 200-yard rusher in the case of Bijan Robinson. So, yeah, Caleb Williams playing lights out. 78.3% passing. And this is just a different offense when Caleb Williams is involved. It's the level of offense that we saw with Kyler Murray and with Baker Mayfield that we were not seeing with Spencer Rattler. And I think that's really an indictment on Rattler as much as it is the case for Caleb Williams.
So let's move on to your first winner. Who do you got here in our Week 7 action?
So my first winner is pretty much the entirety of the Big Ten East because we're going to talk about the Hawkeyes. But with the Hawkeyes losing, I think this opens the door for – I'm not going to put Ohio State first, even though they probably have the best chance to get in of any of those teams right now. Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State all realistically have a shot at the playoffs. Now, they all kind of have to go through each other to a certain extent, but they all have a very realistic shot at the end of the playoffs. And I think the real winner is us, because as the season goes down, all these teams are going to play each other. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see how the Big Ten East plays out. But specifically Ohio State and Penn State here, they've been given brand new life by Purdue's victory over number 2 Iowa to represent the Big Ten in the college football playoff. I think a low-key loser here is the chance for, as we were saying last week, for 2 Big Ten teams to make the playoff. I don't think that's going to happen by any stretch. But, I mean, who knows? We could see a situation where, Michigan only has 1 loss, somehow beats Ohio State, loses to Penn State. Penn State beats Iowa in the Big Ten championship, and then Michigan gets in as a 1 loss at large or something of that nature. But for Penn State and Ohio State, obviously can't mess up down the stretch here. You do wonder about Michigan State as their schedule starts to get tougher. And as Mel Tucker deals with rumors of LSU interest, because that's another story that we haven't talked about yet. We'll get to that. But he's one of the top candidates for the LSU job, as reported by multiple sources, including Bruce Feldman of The Athletic, who's usually right when it comes to these LSU things. He's very plugged in there. So it's going to be a really fascinating end to the Big Ten season. I'm really not sure who the favorite is here. It's probably Ohio State, as I said. But I wouldn't count out Penn State with their ability to play defense. And if they can get Sean Clifford back, and if Sean Clifford is playing lights out, they've got a decent chance to beat all of these teams. So,
well, the big decider on that's actually going to be next weekend, because next weekend we have Michigan, Michigan State, and Penn State, Ohio State. Both those games going on. Penn State, Ohio State's going to be in the shoe at 7:30. Michigan, Michigan State actually hasn't been determined yet when that game's played. So
probably a Fox noon game. If I had to guess, that's going to be big noon.
I would expect it to be that. But exciting times for a lot of these teams. My next team up here, in fact, this one I thought was a little bit of a fun one, given the fact that we have never touched this side of college football before. But I decided to go with the red turf. Now, we all know the blue turf field is up at Boise State and, of course, Boise, Idaho. But the red turf is Eastern Washington, the Eastern Washington Eagles of the FCS, your 2018 FCS runner-up. And you may be wondering why exactly I would have chosen something like this, given how it's a little bit obscure. But there was a performance out there in Washington that was unlike what we have seen in a long time. And I get that it's FCS, which I know is a little bit easier here. But Eastern Washington beats Idaho, who, if you remember, used to be an FBS school, 71-41. Quarterback Eric Barriere, I'm not sure how to pronounce that exactly.
Probably Barriere,
I think.
Probably had it right.
600 yards, 7 touchdowns on only 25 passes. And he was pulled after 13 minutes to go in the fourth quarter and still did all of that. It is one of the most fantastic performances we have seen from a quarterback at pretty much any college football level in a very long time. So I wanted to have a special shout out for a guy like that to do something that's just simply ridiculous. I wanted to see also on that level, it's a school record And he also scored a rushing touchdown too. So with 8 total touchdowns, that was also a school record. No other quarterback in Division I, FBS, or FCS has thrown for 600 yards this season. And it was also the 8th most passing yards ever by an FCS quarterback in a game. It's the 9th time this quarterback has thrown for at least 400 yards, which it's saying something. So pretty neat here. They're actually, Eastern Washington now is up at number 2 in the FCS poll. Sam Houston State is number 1. So I just thought that was pretty neat. They're 7-0. They're having a great season. Just wanted to mention a pretty ridiculous college football stat you don't really see too often.
And I mean, shout out to the Red Turf for that. I have no comment, no response to that. I to be honest with you, I haven't even looked for a second at FCS anything. So honestly, props to you for finding that. Because every now and then, we got a lot of returning characters. We've a lot of recurring characters in our winners and losers, but injecting some new blood, always very nice for us.
And given that we now finally have the share screen ability for us, because now we're on video, I did actually want to pull this up just to show you what it looks like.
Picture of the Red Turf.
No, exactly. So I have it up here in 1 second. Let me pull this up. But so here, can you see it now? So yeah, it's a very bizarre field. And the funniest thing is, you can tell the stadium itself is very small. So this is what the logo looks like right in the middle. I think the EW is so cool. Like, wonderful logo. Really cool logo. So I just think it's kind of crazy.
I'm colorblind, and like whenever you zoom out, it looks green to me.
This field?
Like normal grass. Yeah.
Does that look like red?
No, that one's a little darker, but like from a distance, once you get up close to it and you start zooming in, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like bright red. But like from a distance, like at first glance, that would look green to me. But
that's wild.
Now that you zoom in, I see that it's red.
Well, yeah, because obviously if I go super zoom, then
but like from a distance, when it's smaller. And then if I was just like glancing at it, I probably wouldn't even notice.
But yeah, as you can see right here, stadium's getting renovated as well. So fun fact, they're getting a brand new stadium for stuff. So, or at least for new stadium area. So pretty neat. But just wanted to shout that out. Be a fun thing to talk about.
Put the school in a Power 5 conference. I mean, not in a Power 5 conference, in an FBS conference. We got all this.
I mean, they're actually right outside of Spokane, Washington, so it's they're pretty close to Gonzaga.
But here's the problem: is like all of the schools all of the conferences that are trying to get like some of these better FCS schools to join are like primarily Southern and Eastern conferences, like the Sun Belt, the American.
Which is changing too. I don't know if you saw that. There's actually been a big update with the American Conference.
James Madison is a prime candidate to move up out of the FCS ranks into Division 1A, the FBS, the Football Bowl subdivision.
Georgia Southern did it before. Charlotte's done that recently.
I also
Coastal Carolina.
Before we get too far off of Oklahoma here, I did want to update. Caleb Williams is currently 6th on Heisman odds, and I would guess that those odds are going to go down significantly throughout the season. So I still think Matt Corral or a Kenneth Walker or maybe even CJ Stroud are probably better picks at this point. But I wouldn't totally count out Caleb Williams if he's just a stud that reinvigorates this Oklahoma offense. Like he's got
to go pretty hard, but if he wants to get that though.
But that's doable. A tough call.
It is. But Oklahoma. You gotta.
It's Lincoln Riley.
All right, we can move on to our second winner now, and you go on ahead with yours.
Well, we're not one normally for moral victories, but in the case of the Kentucky Wildcats this past weekend, shout out to them for scoring points. They scored 13 points against a Georgia defense that is holding teams to only 5.8 points per game. That was obviously before this weekend. That number has probably gone up. But, I mean, shout out to Will Levis. 76% passing, 192 yards. They just couldn't get in the end zone. He stayed clean. The problem continues to be for teams that play Georgia, and this is a big problem for Kentucky, whose primary method of moving the football is running the ball. Georgia ain't giving up many running yards. I can't find, let me see the total here. 27 rushes for 51 yards for the Cats on the ground. So this is, I guess, kind of a combo winner because Georgia's defense continues to be one of, if not the greatest run defense of our lifetimes. And Kentucky somehow managed to throw the ball for 192 yards against this defense without getting Will Levis absolutely crushed in this game. Let's take a look at the sack numbers for Georgia. I mean, they only had 3 sacks. That's pretty good. For a team that had to throw the ball as much as Kentucky did, that's pretty good. That's more points than Vandy put up, obviously. That's more points than Arkansas put up, who was a top 10 team when they played the Dogs. So, I mean, props to Kentucky. This could be, if Alabama and Georgia both get in, do you think this could be a Sugar Bowl team, Kentucky?
As of now, yes, but the one thing it's going to depend on is how the rest of the conference sort of shakes out, which I know is kind of obvious saying that, but I mean, really more the other division that they can't really help, because the only other team there that could really shake that up is going to be a team like Ole Miss, considering they just keep pulling out wins, which of course we'll get to them later. But yes, if we'll play along with this of Georgia and Alabama getting in the playoffs, which at this point seems like it's more likely than not that both
I think you would have a tough time choosing between Ole Miss and Kentucky, honestly, because Kentucky doesn't really have that much of an offense, but I mean Ole Miss has zero defense to speak of. If the thing is, though, run out of bounds at the end of that Tennessee game, that could have been a win for the Vols.
So here's the difference, though. Kentucky's season to go at Mississippi State, Tennessee, at Vanderbilt, New Mexico State, at Louisville. Not a super hard schedule.
Games for them.
That's not a very hard schedule. And then if you look at Ole Miss, LSU, at Auburn, Liberty, A&M, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. It's a harder schedule. It's definitely a harder schedule. So I think if both of them, I mean, Ole Miss plays the only ranked team out of both of them. They both have to play Mississippi State. Obviously, Vanderbilt's a free win, and Liberty shouldn't be. I mean, well, Liberty, I almost put them as a loser. They've been falling off pretty hard, actually. Had a pretty bad loss this week. I know they lost to Syracuse earlier. Yippee. But, yeah, Liberty's kind of falling apart. That should be pretty simple for the Ole Miss. But A&M will be difficult, but it is in Oxford, and then at Auburn is going to be quite a fun game. And LSU can always sneak up and get a win. I mean, they beat Florida this last week. They've shown they can be a difficult team at times to deal with. It's just very game dependent.
I just have a very hard time seeing that Ole Miss isn't going to drop at least one of these games, given how bad that defense is. This offense is very extremely explosive. Obviously, we know what Matt Corral is at this point, but as explosive as the offense is, that was a really close game against Tennessee, who is a better team. They're an improving team, but they're not a great team. And there were a lot of offensive mistakes in that game. And I get it. It's a tough place to play in Neyland. We'll talk about that in a little while. But it's going to be really, really tough, I think, for Ole Miss to avoid even one loss coming down the stretch. Obviously, this week at LSU, against LSU at home, I don't think is much of a threat. But Auburn could get frisky. And hey, I mean, Malik Willis walks into that building, doesn't see a defense standing across from him, really. That game could get a little frisky, too. Former Ole Miss head coach, by the way, Hugh Freeze.
I do actually, and that is true. That is true. I do want to share with you one stat before I actually continue on my final winner, which is also in the SEC. But there is only one team that is not named Alabama who has scored more points than Georgia this year, which Alabama has scored more points. Only one other team in the SEC has scored more points than Georgia that's not named Alabama. It is Tennessee, which is pretty only by 6 or 6, yeah, so not by much, but Vols hold a slight edge on scoring, which I would not have thought that. But yeah, Georgia obviously points allowed is silly.
And it's not just running Jalen Hurd, or in the case of Alvin Kamara, not running Alvin Kamara, which in retrospect is probably the dumbest thing Butch Jones ever did at Tennessee, is not playing Alvin Kamara, who's a star in the NFL and was as a rookie. But look, this is not just running Ty Chandler and Todd Kelly Jr. into the ground anymore. This is an explosive offense that can dial up explosive plays down the field and really push the ball. And we'll talk about that whole situation here in a minute. But
my
why
last
don't you get to your...
Yes, okay. Which I'll mention this and then just roll on to my thing. But I actually found it interesting that Georgia, a slight note on them, they only have 4 road games this season, and then 2 neutral and 6 home, because the opener against Clemson was neutral in Charlotte, which was majority Georgia, and they have the neutral against Florida State. Really, for that?
That's way closer to Clemson, South Carolina than it is.
No, I know, but it's still Georgia, who I would say has still a bigger fan base.
A bigger fan base, yes, but I would argue that game was probably primarily Clemson.
But even then, it's still Clemson 2021, which was not the Clemson that was supposed to be. And so that ended up being, now halfway through the season, a pretty average win, if that. We've watched Clemson. I watched Clemson live last week when Syracuse played them, which we'll get to that game. But they really aren't really good at all, especially the offensive side was miserable when I watched them.
Well, and there's an argument to be made that Kentucky and Arkansas are both better wins for Georgia.
At this point, I'd argue that. And it makes it where that one was neutral. And then, of course, the Florida game is a quote-unquote neutral game, as it is every year. But I just think it's interesting that Georgia only plays 4 games technically in an enemy territory stadium that is their own home, which that's unusual. That's pretty unusual. So I would not have thought that. But, yeah, the only real true road games Georgia has are Vanderbilt, which basically doesn't count, Auburn, which that counts. That's a significant one. Tennessee, which that does count. Much more difficult, obviously, in Neyland than in Athens. And then Georgia Tech, which I don't know if you've ever been to a Georgia Tech-Georgia game, but it is 70% Georgia. So basically they play 2 road games.
This might make you a little bit – well, they're going to be playing in Atlanta 2 weeks in a row, by the way. This might make you a little bit. I'm just saying
I'm not trying to say they're not the best team in the country right now, because they are.
Should the SEC championship count as a home game for both Alabama and Georgia? They're both in Mercedes-Benz Stadium like 4 times a year.
At this point, basically. With Georgia a lot more than Bama, simply because Atlanta is. It's.
But think about it, Bama Georgia always plays that kickoff game, and it's either in AT&T or Mercedes.
Yeah, that's true. At this point, you can basically give it like a bona fide game.
They should both have their own locker rooms at Mercedes-Benz, because
at this rate,
no one else is making the SEC championship this year unless things go really haywire.
No, there's really, I get Georgia does have Florida, Mizzou, Tennessee, Charleston, Southern Tech, and at this point, the Florida game looks like that's like I say it's like 80-20 in terms of an upset, and then Mizzou, absolutely no chance. At Tennessee, I think that's
frisky ball game, Jack.
I don't love Georgia in that game. I really don't. They've played too well in literally every game for me to ever think
Tennessee will cover.
Blow it. But Tennessee that could be interesting. Charleston Southern obviously is an FCS nothing game, but then And then Georgia Tech, I don't have really any faith in that. But that would be honestly probably one of the biggest upsets in the series history all time if Tech won that game, which I would almost cry. Even though, of course, that game means nothing if they lose that because they're still making the playoffs. But it's would still be pretty fun. But anyway, I'll move on and I'll actually get into Alabama because I was going to talk about my final winner, which I called the Yellowhammer bounce back, which was Alabama and Auburn, both coming off of losses / buys, but the last game was a loss, and both of them really showing up and playing really well. And I get they didn't necessarily play the best competition this week, but they both really needed to come back and look good, and they really did. So big shout out to Alabama first of all for, of course, the Mississippi A&M loss was very painful for them. But then they played Mississippi State, and honestly, I knew it's the classic. Yeah, whenever Bama does have a rare loss, you know the team the next week is just going to lose by 40, which is what happened. So yeah, Mississippi State looked horrific. This game was done immediately. It was not really much of a game. Bryce Young looked fantastic. It wasn't much of a game, and I think we all saw that coming. Alabama, Tennessee is coming up this weekend, so let's see how that goes. But I do think it could be pretty entertaining. I mean, again, Tennessee's been more impressive than I would have expected this season. So I think really anyone expected. Sitting at what now 4 and I know 4-3 is not great, but I mean the Ole Miss game was razor thin, and I don't know. Tennessee has played pretty decently this season.
It's all going to come down to the health of Hendon Hooker.
Yeah, and the next 3 games could easily be losses, but I think at this point Tennessee is locked in a bowl game, given that they're 4-3 and they have to play South Alabama and Vanderbilt too. So Tennessee's minus an insane collapse. Tennessee's going to a bowl game.
As a semi fan of Tennessee, never ever count out Vanderbilt in that game, ever, for any reason.
I just don't think that's gonna happen.
And I don't either. I really hope it doesn't.
And I also wanted to mention on that note, Auburn a little bit too, sort of counts, of course, in the Yellowhammer, and that was coming off the loss to Georgia, which was expected but still painful. But then the Arkansas game, I know that was a game that we actually disagreed on picking, and you ended up getting the right pick here. And it was, it was a pretty solid, clean match. I mean, Auburn came in and really just sort of handed them a big L. It was 38-23 in Arkansas. I mean, I know that it was not necessarily like Arkansas to lose, because I do think that Auburn was still a good team coming into that. But this was, I still think, fairly impressive. So, no, I liked a lot of what Auburn brought to the table. So I think that was a pretty entertaining game. But now we can move on to your final winner before we go into our losers. So take us away.
My final winner, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, and that's because I don't think that they're that good, but they're good enough for me to recognize them in the winners column finally, and that is the Oklahoma State Pokes, the Cowboys. Look, Okie State got the job done against a Texas team that it was 5-point underdogs against. And Texas ended up coming out in this game and getting a lead in the first half, and then they just blew it. So Texas choking is definitely back. Texas is not back, but Texas chokes very much back. And for that, Oklahoma State, we thank you. I don't think this is going to be a great team down the stretch, but between them and Baylor, one of those teams is probably going to make the Fiesta Bowl, sadly, and play whoever the surviving member of the Pac-12 is at the end of the year.
That sounds like an awful game.
Probably Oregon. This is going to be a terrible game. I mean, last year was also a bad game between Iowa State, who I think everyone thought was a good team last year.
To be fair, I was like, to pump the brakes a bit. They actually were deserving, and they were deserving to be there.
But against an Oregon team that was actually worse last year, yet is somehow less exciting this year.
There's like nothing about them. It's so weird how quiet this team is.
Contradictory as that sounds, they were way worse last year with Tyler Show at the helm, yet they're somehow far less interesting this year. which to a football coach might be a good thing if you're just playing boring football and winning games, but they're not really winning games. I mean, they eked one out against Cal last week. They obviously have the loss to Stanford. So if I had to pick, and we should do this maybe next episode, or maybe once the college football playoff rankings come out, but we should start projecting bowl games because I think the worst bowl as of right now is probably going to be the Fiesta Bowl because there is no second good Big 12 team. There's one fun Big 12 team other than Oklahoma, and that's Texas. And they're not even that fun. They just choke and they're a big name. And they've got some offense. And they've got Bijan Robinson. But Oklahoma State is not a fun team. They've been pretty underwhelming with the.
Well, it's because that's what you get with a team with a very below average quarterback and a pretty solid unit around him, which is a weird team, but that's kind of what you get here. I mean, we've been talking smack about Sanders for over a year now, and I think it's still pretty warranted.
Yeah, no, it's very warranted.
It's still warranted.
He doesn't even have 1,000 yards passing this season, which I know 1,000 yards passing is like nothing to turn your nose at, but that's pretty baseline for like a college offense. Is just being able to move the ball and push the ball downfield, unless you're just the running attack that Georgia or Kentucky has. But I would have to look at the stats. I'm sure Will Levis probably has close to 1,000 yards passing. I just think Spencer Sanders has been around for too long to be this bad at college football. Like at a certain point, you're just not a good quarterback. But it really concerns me that he's their first option at Oklahoma State. There's nowhere else on that roster that they can turn. And I realize that you don't want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But, your counterparts down in Norman, it wasn't really that broke, and they really fixed it. So that I'm not confident about Oklahoma State, but I did want to give them their flowers before inevitably they mess up somewhere along the road. Or maybe they just go undefeated into the Big 12 championship, get killed by Oklahoma, and then we get to see a terrible game between Oregon and Oklahoma State. And that's just assuming that Oregon wins the Pac-12 championship, which is absolutely not a given.
No, it's not. And we've seen how, at least to put it simply, chaotic the Pac-12 has been, which it kind of always is. I mean, it's kind of like the Pac-12 is just the Western ACC, which is just like the disappointing, but they usually have a good team in there.
We had Arizona State go down in Salt Lake this weekend. And
of course
we
they
were
did.
talking last week, you specifically were talking Arizona State, and you weren't wrong.
They're still good. It's just Pac-12.
Had a chance to make the playoffs. They probably had the best chance of any Pac-12 team, and they completely blew that.
I mean, so Michigan State, you blow a game, and that your odds plummet. But if you keep on winning, Michigan State's in prime position. So I mean,
Clemson's not going to the playoff.
Thank God.
Crossing my fingers there, but I feel pretty good about that assumption.
No, watching them live, if Syracuse looked better most of the game, and if Syracuse looks better than you in a game, you're not going to the playoffs.
And Clemson's not going to the playoffs, but we could still have a really unfun playoff this year, because after all of this chaos, after we've been saying, oh, this is the most fun college football season we've had probably since 2007,
it's still Georgia.
It's still going to be Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and whatever fourth team they feel bad about.
Maybe Oklahoma. It might be them.
It might be those four. Or, maybe, hopefully Cincinnati gets in there.
I would love any of those four.
If Ohio State wins the Big Ten, they're not keeping Ohio State out. So, no. The New Year's Six Bowls could be really, really fun, but the playoffs might suck again. Is all I'm trying to say here. But let's get to the losers. And going off of the Big 12, I'm just going to go ahead and get into my first loser. My first loser is the 4-2-5, which, if you don't know, is Gary Patterson's. He was the pioneer of the 4-2-5. Let's get 5 DBs on the field to combat all of this air raid talent in Oklahoma. But here's the thing, and there was a great article, and I cannot remember the guy's name who wrote it. I would love to be able to quote that article, but I actually just don't have it up right now. But basically, he was calling for Gary It was a TCU alum on Medium.com. He was calling for Gary Patterson to mutually part ways with TCU. He got blocked by Coach P, of course, because Coach P can't handle criticism.
I did see that, which is typical. Nothing shocking
Coach
there.
He tends to do. But look, let me pull up the Big 12 team defense stats this year. This is not going deep analytics or anything, but TCU is next to last in the Big 12 in defense. And this is from a defensive quote.
Shockingly bad. Awful.
Gary Patterson. And would you like to know who has better defenses than TCU?
Let's take a listen.
Texas Tech. Texas Tech. They gave up 70 to Texas and still
Tech is only known for not having a defense. That's like their shtick they do. Is not having a defense.
Less points and less yards per game in every facet of the game. Tech has a better defense. Oklahoma has a better defense. K-State has a better defense. The Longhorns have a better defense.
K-State still hasn't won a Big 12 game.
Have a better defense than TCU. You know who the only team in the conference that has a worse defense than TCU is?
That fun team from Lawrence.
It's Kansas.
Yep.
And even they are only giving up 40 more yards a game.
Kansas has scored 28 points in its first 6 games, mind you, just to tell you how bad that is.
This is outrageous. Why are we giving Gary Patterson a pass for this? Why are we paying him $6 million a year to recruit 3 stars and put out a defense that gives up 210 yards per game rushing? That is absolutely atrocious. And I know I was a little bit sheepish about it. I wasn't even that sheepish. I came right out and said it, but now I'm being vehement about it. Gary Patterson needs to leave. This is bad. This is awful. He can't coach modern football. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. He has a coaching staff entirely filled by his friends and family. Not really family, but Jerry Kill was in his wedding party. He just brought back the retread of Doug Meacham, and that's not working out to the tune of 12 jet sweeps a game and not giving Zach Evans the ball. This is not the TCU football that we know and love, and I realized that they were still winning when they could give up 68 points a game and still put up 60 points a game and win shootouts in that fashion, but not in today's game and not with the offense that Gary is putting on the field. It's no longer innovative. It's no longer in style, and it looks bad. It looks really bad. For as much as we were talking about earlier, how Duggan had a good game, the offense this year against every team pretty much except for Oklahoma and Texas Tech, who are both bottom 5 defenses in the Big 12 as well. And bottom 5 in the Big 12 means you are a bad defense. It's been really, really bad. And that's my rant for the week. The 4-2-5 is on the hot seat. And I know Dr. Stewart, one of our favorite professors at TCU, was engaged in a Twitter conversation about it, and he was pointing out that I don't think Boschini or Donati are in any hurry to try to chase Coach P out for $6 million, but eventually one of those big money boosters has to bring up the idea, because this just is unacceptable for TCU football and for the standard that Coach P has set for his own program.
Yes, sorry. Sorry, let me get back to my spot. Yeah, so for the losers on my end, I was looking at something else that was very disappointing so far this week, and that was the Iowa Hawkeyes. And Iowa was a team that we know that when they lost to Purdue this week, we had said before the game, Iowa State's schedule to close the season is not hard. Wasn't very hard.
Yeah,
it isn't.
We were
That's
like,
first thing we said.
There's a decent chance they go undefeated. Yeah, sure.
That is the first thing, is we said it is not that bad, and they should go through with it, but maybe they drop something. And the first game in that stretch was Purdue. And what does Purdue do better than nearly anyone else in the country?
Beat
the number two. They are the fifth most all-time in wins against AP number 2 teams. And I think that they have beaten, I think this is right, I don't have it on here, but I think that they have actually beaten more number 2 seeds as an unranked team than anybody in history. And so it's always Purdue. And they did it again. And actually, I wanted to say 3 years ago today was when Purdue beat Ohio State when they were unranked and Ohio State was number 2. And that was the Tyler, what was his last name? The Purdue super fan who had cancer and who passed away after.
Was it? No.
It was Tyler something Purdue. I need to find this, but
yeah. Oh, I remember you were talking about.
This is important because
either way,
Tyler Trent.
Yes.
And I think that's right. And so it was 3 years ago today, and then now it's just sort of wild that was all 3 years ago today, and then this weekend Purdue does it again. And so Purdue just always finds a way to do it. Iowa State is Iowa, well, also Iowa State, but Iowa is quite fraudulent, as you can see as the title of this podcast, or I guess down here. But it's pretty bad. We knew that Iowa was going to have something. At least I knew that Iowa at some point was going to screw up. I had very little faith this team was still going to make some kind of massive splash anywhere. But it's still pretty bad. Still pretty bad. And you have to win a game like this. You can't choke this.
No, and they can't choke it particularly in the way that they did. It wasn't like this game was particularly close in any form or fashion. I mean, Iowa did have a chance to, come back, get something going at the start of the first quarter. But it was like I listened to the guys from the Cover 3 podcast talking about it after the game. And Tom Fornelli is one of the what I would suggest one of the foremost sort of experts on the Big Ten. And he was saying that eventually we knew Iowa's defense wasn't going to hold up for an entire game, and their offense would have to bail them out. And could their offense bail them out when their defense, which was playing incredible for the first half of the year, could their defense carry them to the end of the season? And the answer was no. They gave up 464 yards of offense to Purdue, 378 of which came through the air. They only forced one turnover, and Spencer Petras threw 3 interceptions on the final 3 drives of the game for Iowa. And that's going to be the story, is that Spencer Petras is totally not the sort of level of quarterback that you have to have if you want to be a contender for the playoff. He's just not. He's not there yet. Iowa had been getting a lot of short fields. But I mean, you and me both said coming out of the Penn State game that we thought Iowa was fraudulent. Their resume, absolutely, with their resume, they deserve to be where they were on paper. But just in watching this team has looked fraudulent all year. So I'm right with you there. But let's move on. I got my second loser of the week, and we can just kind of move past this because we already sort of briefly mentioned this game. But no more Woo Pig Suey for the rest of the year. I'm tired of the Arkansas Razorbacks. It was a fun start to the year. They are a program on the up and up. But a loss against Auburn this week. That was a big one.
Pigs on the barbecue tonight.
And if you want to say that you have a good defense, you can't lose to Bo Nix.
True. Yeah, I know we've talked about these teams a little bit, so I know we don't need to go too much in it, but yeah, it's still pretty bad. You did your call about this game was pretty spot on when you were saying like the time for this team being ranked has seen its course, and that should be about it. And so
yeah,
proved to be correct there.
Thank you, Hogs, for making the first part of the season fun. Your services are no longer needed, or maybe they are when Bama. When the Bama
who knows?
No, they're not beating Bama. Let me tell you.
Oh no. My second loser here is one that I want to talk about a little bit because, and I know you always have talked about him actually even before that I've been to Syracuse, but wanted to mention here, this is actually a little bit of our preview of our Agony Olympics section, which we got some more for that, but Syracuse has lost for the third straight week by a field goal. And all 3 games are winnable. And I will still sit here and say, and I will say confidently, that Syracuse right now is 3-4. They could be 7-0. Syracuse 100% could be 7-0. Every game they've lost this year has been shockingly bad.
A lot of things could happen, Jack.
No. But get what I'm saying, that like every single one of those games was a really winnable game down to the fourth quarter and was blown at the end. There was no game, and I've watched every single one of these games, and there's yet to be a game this season where Syracuse seemed like the clear worst team. They were clearly dominated. There was no chance. I mean, there are a lot of teams this season that have lost games that you say, okay, well, like even Arkansas Auburn was like, okay, well, Auburn was the better team. They won. Not really much of a question. It was over. And that was sort of the end of it. And so then when you look at Syracuse, it's been just so tight every week and they just can't finish. And so that's why the loser for this week isn't just Syracuse, but it's Dino always covers Babers because he always finds a way to cover. He always finds a way to cover, but he just can't win. He just can't. And the Clemson game showed that again, a 48-yard field goal missed in the final drive. And it was actually, which we'll get to this hopefully tomorrow or sometime before this weekend, but it was kind of an inverse of what happened with the Buffalo-Tennessee game, where the losing team that was down by 3 was driving in on the final drive and had the choice of you can either get a field goal that is manageable or you go for it and see what you can do. But the difference is that Buffalo was, of course, on like the 3-yard line and elected to go for it and then missed, and then game over, Titans won. This game, Syracuse decided to do the other thing that was the opposite of what they needed to do, and that was kick a field goal. And let me tell you this just to make my argument make sense here. Andre Schmidt, Syracuse's kicker, won the Groza Award in 2018. Best kicker in the country. Fantastic. Since then, oh yeah, thank you for adding that right up here. Since then, this season, he is perfect inside 40 yards, and he is 1 for 6 outside 40. 1 for 6 outside 40. And Babers said, it's 4th and 1. I have a really oversized rushing quarterback and one of, if not the top running back in the country. Maybe not the top, but like Sean Tucker is 100% up there. He's in the upper echelon of running backs. And it's 4th and a half yard. And so what do we do with 40 seconds left? We call a timeout and then kick a field goal, because why would you drop the clock? Why would that make any sense to drop the clock if you're going to, kick a field goal? But we call a timeout anyway for no reason, and then decide to kick the field goal, which of course is missed, not even close, and then Clemson wins. And to me, it's a whole series of inexplicable coaching decisions, because I don't know why are you stopping the clock if you're going to kick a field goal? Why not go for it when you have 2 great running options and we've been able to run really effectively against Clemson all day? Well, I don't understand. I don't get the call. They asked about it in the press conference and they didn't really know an answer, and I don't know.
Let me hit you with some knowledge. The Syracuse spread in this game was plus 13.5.
Which is an awful spread. That was a terrible spread.
You know what? Maybe so.
That was a bad. I would have taken that.
I was at work and forgot to bet it before the game.
That would be that's the lock of the week. That would be my lock of the week.
I live bet plus 7.5. And he's still covered, baby. Good teams win. Great teams cover. Syracuse is, in my book, a great team this year.
And you know what we have next coming up? We have to go to Neyland Stadium to play Virginia Tech, which I'm aware lost last week and really isn't that elite. But watch us lose by 2 this week. Watch us lose by it's going to happen.
At least you don't have to go to Neyland Stadium, which I almost had as a winner. Because, like, in the grand scheme of things, is it like Ole Miss threw track? For those of you who did not watch the game, this game was absolute pandemonium, and Tennessee had about 4 chances to win it at the end. Hendon Hooker ended up getting hurt. Joe Milton threw a beautiful pass to the end zone that literally just ended up going through his receiver's hands in the end zone. With about 4 seconds left on the clock. And then on the Hail Mary attempt, Joe Milton, who, if you remember, former Michigan quarterback, not really known for his rushing ability, decides to roll, first off, left. He's a righty. You never want your quarterback rolling left on a Hail Mary play. Second off, he just decides to take off and run from about the 30. With 4 defenders in front of him, and then just ran out of bounds. So that was the game. And props to Tennessee for making this a ball game. It feels like a new chapter of Tennessee football, which I feel like I say every single year. But this really does. It feels different.
They feel a little more complete and exciting than before.
Right. Under Jeremy Pruitt, it was like, okay, we still have 0 offense, but at least we have a little bit of a defense. At least now we can say that we have a little bit of a defense and we've got an offense. We have a legit offense. But all that to say, there was an incident on the field where play had to be stopped for about 25 minutes because Tennessee fans were throwing a multitude of things on the field, mostly beer cans and water bottles.
But there were some fun additions.
But there was a golf ball, multiple golf balls thrown at Lane Kiffin, which, like, who the hell planned to? I'm going to bring a golf ball to this game.
There was a full bottle of mustard.
There was a full bottle of mustard, lots of dip spit.
Pizza box fell on the field.
Pizza box. Pandemonium in Neyland Stadium, and everyone wants to clutch their pearls. I mean, the announcers, which Jordan Rogers went to Vandy, so he should have never been on the call in the first place. But Jordan Rogers, Aaron Rodgers' brother, was clutching pearls harder than any person I've ever seen, being like, this fan base should be ashamed of themselves. Who was it? Was it Dari Noka on ESPN that said that Tennessee fans need to re-examine their lives?
He did, actually. But here's the reason. Here's the thing, though, which I need to make this point. The reason why that I thought all of that, besides the fact that it actually happened, which was absurd, but the real reason why I thought it was absolutely insane is because there were 54 seconds left and Tennessee had all 3 timeouts. The game was so not over. And that's what I couldn't believe, because I was like, yeah, the odds are pretty bad at that point. But I was like, this game is not even close to being over.
What we haven't mentioned is that they called Tennessee a yard short on a very, very close 4th down call.
I think it was the right call. It was really close. I think it was the right call.
I think he was short personally, but I don't think any of us can say with the terrible camera angles that we had definitively. All of the camera angles that we had for that particular play were awful. And I don't think that you can say definitively one way or another that he was short.
But you can't overturn that he wasn't. That's the thing.
Right. The call on the field was that he was short, so that call stood. But if he had been across the line, I think the call also would have stood. If that,
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Their angles were bad.
But think about it. There's been so many injuries up to that point in the game, which we can talk about Ole Miss faking injuries another time. But I've never seen so many cramps on a crisp 50-degree night in Knoxville next to a river. We should talk about that at some point. But for all the collective pearl clutching, this could have been so much worse and really was not that bad.
But it's still, you can't do that. As fans, you still can't do that because at the end of the day, you still have to respect the game, and you
The
can't throw
game
garbage on
also
your own field.
the
You
game
can't do
also
that.
started at 7:30 Eastern time, and it was midnight in Neyland by the time that happened. And if you've ever been to a Tennessee game, you know that the people of Knoxville love to drink, and they
No, but then
start
that's their own
early
fault. You can't.
and they do it
I
often.
mean, I mean
I
that's
would
then their own fault. Then I mean, if you're
look.
gonna get yourself
I'm
drunk and do
not trying
something
to
stupid, it's
trash.
still.
I'm not trying to trash any other fan base. I'm just saying this isn't going to happen at Alabama because, Alabama fans, they're like, oh, we win all the time. I'm a bandwagon. Yeah, I became an Alabama fan 3 weeks ago. Yeah, cool. Roll Tide. I would not put.
Well,
put
tell
this
us how you
past-
really feel.
I would not put this past LSU fans.
Yeah.
I would not put this past Mississippi State fans. This
Yeah.
actually happened at an Ole Miss Tennessee basketball game in 2019.
Well, no, I know people brought that up, but I was like, two wrongs don't make a right either. Like, just because Ole Miss did that wrong doesn't mean that Tennessee has free reign to do whatever they want.
I would not put this past Georgia fans.
No, absolutely not.
And honestly, I think nowadays not enough South Carolina fans go to the game for this to happen. I wouldn't put this past Florida fans. I would put it past Vandy fans if they had any. Maybe Arkansas. Yeah. I would put it past Auburn.
They've been nice. I went to an Arkansas game in Fayetteville. They're fine.
Again, I'm not trashing any.
No, I know. I just wanted to specifically shout out Arkansas as not being too bad.
I'm just saying that this was a point that Brandon Walker from Barstool made. There are so many other fan bases in the country that are entirely capable of this. And Tennessee just chose to do it because Tennessee fans are fed up with awful refereeing.
Yes, but clearly doing it is worse than being capable of doing it.
Right. No, I'm not. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm just arguing that, for all the collective pearl clutching, we're probably going to forget about this except for, the one time a year that it comes up on, Twitter.
Well, yeah, I mean, as all of sports news is, it'll age in 3 seconds once you're done with it. Like the whole Deshaun Watson news that's going around that may be happening. That too.
Next year, we're not still going to be talking about, even probably at the end of this season, oh, the horror! Tennessee fans threw beer cans on the field. Chill out.
Well, it's the news that's now. We know how that works. We know the news well enough.
Re-examine their lives for throwing a beer can on a football field.
No, again, it's the soundbite. We know news well enough to know they're just gonna say that to say that. But now let's see. Is there anything else you wanted to add in winners and losers before we move on?
My honorable mention for a loser is Hook'em Horns. We already talked about that game, but Texas is definitely not back.
Which is always nice. We love when every year when it happens. Every year when it happens.
2 games in a row against both Oklahoma teams, and I think one of those teams is very clearly better than the other.
Yeah, I made fun of a friend of mine today who wore a Texas shirt to class, which, mind you, he's from California, so I was sort of like, let's not do that. We don't need to wear that today. And he was like, well, didn't Texas already beat you? And I was like, that's not really a big accomplishment this season, and Texas already played themselves out of being relevant. So congrats for being equally as relevant as us. Yeah. I was like, no, you can be bad and still be aware of other teams that are bad too. So it's always there. But now we can look at just any other sort of games I wanted to just touch on for a second before we talk about our Agony Olympics. Florida got another ranked team down with losing to LSU unranked, and LSU also then will officially now be losing Ed Orgeron at the end of the year. We kind of knew this was coming, but this week was basically official that's now going to be done, I get it. It's just talk about a 2-year turnaround.
Have you gotten the chance to read the athletic report of why that went down? I will try to screenshot that and send it to you because there are a lot of allegations being made against Coach O. Not necessarily sexual assault allegations, but it's basically a whole storm of things to where after the national championship, he got divorced and then he started essentially chasing women, and he would like bring them to practice and let their kids play in drills with the teams.
Oh, coach.
So, like,
He is an odd man.
If that's not true, then I will defer to the athletic report that told me that was true. But if that is true, like, holy hell, man! Like, yeah, you should be fired.
Yeah, so we'll see if any of that comes out. Only other news: BYU loses to Baylor on the road, which was pretty pathetic. And then San Diego State keeps on winning. So another fun kind of smaller team. San Diego State beat San Jose State in double overtime. They play Air Force this week, which is actually one of the few games I'm highlighting because it's one of those smaller conference games that I think actually be a pretty good game. Air Force has been a pretty good team this year, and San Diego State's been great. So
San Diego State has the second best defense in the country as far as EPA per play.
Well, they're really good. I mean, really, I'll give them credit. They're a very solid team. Other games here, Ohio Buffalo is a game that I never would have talked about, except there was a 99-yard quarterback scramble, which that has literally never happened before. So pretty cool there that in FBS history, nobody has ever had a 99-yard quarterback run, but it happened in this game, which was a crazy play too. I don't know how he pulled that off, but pretty wild. UNC Miami in a game that would have been really cool preseason. Nobody cared about it this week, but it was an 87-point game, which I feel like that always happens in the Coastal. The Coastal has no defense, and UNC pulls out the win. Pittsburgh, Virginia Tech played. Panthers are now 5-1, and honestly, Pittsburgh is a pretty good team. I think they're actually for ACC standards, they're a pretty good team.
I thank you for that caveat for ACC standards, because
they don't suck. I mean, they're not awful.
There is an entirely different standard in the ACC than exists in maybe the rest of college football.
I know it's not very good, but all I'm saying is that Pittsburgh is going to make a pretty decent bowl this year.
This is like saying, yeah, the Giants are pretty good by NFC East standards.
No, because the Giants are actually a bad team. Pittsburgh's not a bad team. The Giants
suck. Maybe it's like saying, oh, the Washington football team is good by NFC East standards.
Yeah, because they're not terrible. They're just pretty average. So it's only their games in here. UTSA still unbeaten. They're actually ranked for the first time in program history. They blanked Rice, which was typical, but good for you, 7-0.
Let them play Notre Dame in the Independence Bowl. I want to see that.
Air Force and Nevada also both won, which I know I talked about FCSU. But yeah, the top of the Mountain West is not Boise State like we kind of thought, but the Mountain West race has actually been pretty entertaining this year, so good for them. But now we can move on to my favorite section personally, and that is the Agony Olympics, because, we want to see who's going to win gold this week. I know we talked about some of our candidates up here about Syracuse losing to Clemson in a game that they had every card in the book to win. TCU is also a candidate for here, getting absolutely rocked by Oklahoma, as we do traditionally, and against the backup, which we know is much better than Rattler, but still, like, you couldn't have done better than 52 points given up on defense. Arizona, they're still losing. Arizona's losing streak is now at 18. They lost to Colorado. They got shut out by Colorado, who is awful. And so Colorado's 1-4 in this. Colorado was coming into this game at 1-4, and they blanked Arizona. Vanderbilt almost won. Sorry?
Not to mention that Arizona's quarterback is out for the rest of the year.
Oh, boy. Vanderbilt almost beat South Carolina. South Carolina wins on a field goal in a very pathetic game, but
agony I thought it was going to happen.
Vanderbilt
had to win an SEC game this year, and for it to be against South Carolina would have just been so comical.
And also, Liberty begins with an L for a reason. They lose to ULM, which, this team actually had serious, pretty decent high hopes preseason as a really good independent team, and they have disappointed heavily. And only other one on the Agony Olympics, which I may have to give to Yale, because for the first time this year or last year, UConn wins. The Huskies finally win a game, and they're now 1-7, but they did beat Yale. So congratulations to UConn for finally winning a game. So who is your gold medalist in the Agony Olympics this week? I want to know your pick for who gets gold.
My gold medalist in the Agony Olympics? Oh, boy. Probably,
there's a lot of good choices.
Probably South Carolina. Like, I know that they won the game.
Oh, man.
But you're an SEC team. Vandy is like more of an honorary SEC team. In other sports, Vandy's like the Alabama of baseball. That's great.
And they're pretty good at basketball. Scottie Pippen Jr. back this year. They'll be decent at basketball.
They're really good in baseball. Phenomenal program there. Their football program is arguably probably their worst program on campus, ironically.
So at least they have cool uniforms.
And the fact that this was even a competitive game against South Carolina tells me everything I need to know about the South Carolina Gamecocks.
Bet every penny against them the rest of the season.
They are horrendous.
Oh, God. So, yeah, I just wanted to shout that out. My personal gold medalist is going to be Syracuse, only because they've lost now 3 times in a row in games that they really should have won. And this one probably on the most boneheaded coaching call on all 3 of the games, especially against the Clemson team that we know is not the best team in the ACC, but this would have been the biggest pedigree win, and we had it right there and just fumbled it away. And so it's just that's pain, absolute pain. So we can now sort of wrap up with some other things before we get into our picks, and that's going to be first off the Undefeateds, going down this list really quickly, and we have at 7-0, 3 teams, and that's number 1, Georgia, number 3, Oklahoma, and number 9, Michigan State. And then at 6-0, we have a whole bunch more. Cincinnati at 2, Michigan at 6, Oklahoma State at 8, Coastal Carolina at 14, Wake at 16, SMU at 21, San Diego State at 22, and finally UTSA at 24. So every single undefeated team is now officially ranked. College football playoff odds are fairly predictable, but to still go through them, Georgia has a 90% chance of making it. At second is Oklahoma with a 62% chance of the obvious drop-off. Then Cincy at 61, Bama at 59, Michigan at 38, Ohio State 36, and then actually Pitt at 15%, which is interesting, and then Michigan State at 10%. If that goes to show you about Big Ten competition.
If Pitt makes the playoff this year, I will get a tattoo somewhere on my body.
Can it be of Pitt?
No, it will not be of Pitt, but I will get a tattoo.
If Pitt, watch them. They're gonna lose next week and then be over. I mean, God, they lost to Western Michigan.
They're not making the playoff. The ACC is not making the playoff.
No, it's impossible. Next up, we then have our AP Top 25, and with that, it is Georgia, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, Bama all move up a spot, as well as Ohio State. Michigan is up 2, now to 6. Penn State stays steady at 7. Oklahoma State shoots up 4 spots to number 8, which is very interesting.
A now unranked 3-loss Texas team.
It's so bad. Oregon and Michigan, I think it's just to give Iowa State the plus if they win. Oregon and Michigan State both go up a spot. Iowa collapses down 9 to be out of the top 10, which they deserve. Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Coastal Carolina all move up 1, and Kentucky drops down 4. Wake Forest stays at 16. A&M and North Carolina State both move up 4 spots each to 17 and 18. Auburn and Baylor fill in the 19 and 20 spots from the unranks, and SMU and San Diego State move up a couple. And the final 3 spots are actually all unranked teams too. That's Pittsburgh, UTSA, and then Purdue all coming in at not ranked. Teams that dropped out are Arkansas, Arizona State, BYU, Florida, and Texas. And then your receiving votes are Clemson, Utah, Arkansas, BYU, and Air Force.
I think it's a rule. I think it's a rule that the AP voters collectively have that you have to have either Auburn or Texas in the bottom half of the top 25 at all times.
You have to.
You have to. Because they're too big of brands and they play too many games that you have to promote. You got to have one of Auburn or Texas in the bottom half of the top 25. Does not matter how good they are. I think Auburn and Texas could both be 0-7, and you would put one of them in the bottom half of the top 25. They'd find a way to be like, good loss, 25.
And next up, we're going to have our picks. Always a fun spot. We'll try to get through these pretty quickly. I know we're now over an hour, but we'll get right through them. And just FYI, this slate for week eight is pretty bad, but fortunately, week 9 is actually looking pretty good. So it looks like next week we'll get in some great picks for Halloween, but this week not too great. But we'll start it off with Wake Forest against Army. And the only reason why I have this one on here, as it sounds like an awful game, but only because Army's 4-2, and they've had a pretty better record than anyone thinks. Unfortunately, those 4 wins have been against pretty bad teams, and their only 2 losses are against good teams. So I think Wake's going to win this pretty easily.
Yeah, I've got Wake in this game too. I don't see Army pulling this off. I really don't.
The thing is for Wake that I'm very interested to see is that the week after that is against Duke, who's awful. And then you have North Carolina, who's been very average, NC State, who's pretty solid, Clemson, who's been average, but it's at Clemson. And then you have Boston College on the road. So that's what I'm very
three tough games in a row.
That's going to be tricky. So I'm very interested to see what'll sort of come out of that little list there, just because I think that'll be on that list. Next up, we then have Oklahoma State against Iowa State in one of the better matchups here. And I'm going to have to roll with Iowa State in this one. I know it's unranked versus number 8, but it's also in Ames. And we know crazy stuff happens in Ames every year. Iowa State always beats some big team every season. It's what they do. And pretty much every time it's at home when they do it. I know it happened to TCU, sadly, a few years ago when we came in at number 4. And I actually think that team was better than Oklahoma State at the time. Like that team at number 4 than what Oklahoma State is at number 8. So I don't know. I think Iowa State's been a little disappointing this season, to say the least. We know Purdy hasn't been great, but this rushing offense is really good, and their defense has put up some really solid numbers, and I think actually better than Oklahoma State's numbers. They both have allowed the exact same amount of points at 58 each, but Iowa State has scored almost 30 more. So I like Iowa State in this game as a big upset.
Yeah, and Iowa State has the better defense on paper, but I think in practice, given the schedule that Oklahoma State has faced versus the schedule that Iowa has faced, I'm going with Oklahoma State in this game. I think their defense is going to really be able to cause some issues for Brock Purdy, and they're not just going to be able to lean on Breece Hall for the entire game. Again, still not very confident in Spencer Sanders. But I am moderately confident in this Pokes defense to be able to get it done against an Iowa State offense that has looked really, really bad against the good teams that they've played this year.
Next up, we have Oregon versus UCLA, and the Oregon Ducks are a team that has been kind of hyped up, but then kind of fell back again. And the Stanford loss was pretty bad, and then the Cal win by only 7 was not exactly a lot to leave faith with. So I think I'm going to still be rolling with Oregon in this one, even though I'm not really confident in them, but it's not like UCLA's done a lot recently to be extremely confident in either. I know they beat Washington, but only by a touchdown, and they beat Arizona, but only by a couple scores. And frankly, I don't think either of those teams are very good at all.
Well, the fact that the spread of this game opened at 3 points for Oregon worries me a little bit, but I'm not going to put too much stock into it. There has been a lot of line movement. So right now on FanDuel, you can get UCLA -1.5. Oh, I don't like that at all. I'm switching my pick here. I'm going with UCLA because this feels like a game where Oregon should be favored, and the fact that UCLA is favored on a lot of books right now is really throwing me off. And you can check, because I'm on a different website than I'm normally on, so you can check me on that line.
Oregon is +2.
Yeah. So that line has moved all the way out to 2 on some books. I like UCLA to cover that. I feel like Oregon should be favored, and the fact that they're not tells me that Vegas kind of knows something that we don't. So yeah, I'm actually going to change to UCLA in this game. Get you one different there. A really interesting game this weekend, though. Perhaps the most interesting of the weekend, dare I say, is going to be Clemson versus Pitt. Now, I think the road ends here for Pittsburgh. I don't trust their offense. against a pretty stout Clemson defense. As much as they have had their fair share of struggles on offense, they have not been letting teams score a ton of points against them. So I think the buck stops here the bus stops here for Pittsburgh. I'm going with Clemson. I think they're just going to outcoach Pat Narduzzi.
Pitt's offense has been incredibly impressive so far this season. And when I say incredibly impressive within the ACC at least, they've scored 43 more points than anybody else in the conference, and they've done so pretty easily. And
that's not saying that much.
Well, but they're still playing within the conference, and so is Clemson too. And Clemson's offense has been objectively far, far, far worse than what Pittsburgh has seen. And based on at least what I watched this weekend, now I know that Syracuse's defense is actually pretty good, and their offense is pretty bad. At least seeing that game, Clemson was held in check very, very easily.
Okay, but can I read – I don't mean to interrupt, but can I read you the Pittsburgh Panthers' schedule?
I know it's not good. Yeah, I get it's not good.
UMass, 77 against New Hampshire, and 52 against Georgia Tech. So against good opponents, who I would call good opponents, you've got Tennessee where they scored 41, Western Michigan they lost and scored 41, and then Virginia Tech they only scored 28, and I think Virginia Tech has a decent defense. So I think against a defense with as much talent as Clemson has, I think they're going to really struggle.
I'm coming off of a week where I just watched Clemson live. I was there for every snap. I saw that game, and I just barely saw anything out of Clemson that made me really impressed in how they were. They were not a very good team. Syracuse basically shot themselves in the foot in that game and should have won it, but instead really just sort of blew the game themselves. I think this could be a big moment for Pittsburgh to step up and get a win. I think they're a very solid team. I think their quarterback is among the best in the ACC with Pickett. I have a lot of faith in this team. I think they're going to get a big win here.
Well, Syracuse is favored by 3.5, but just throwing that out there.
That what? Sorry?
They're favored by 3.5.
Against Virginia Tech?
No, against Clemson.
Oh, they were. I thought you were saying they are. I was like, what? Oh,
no, they are. Pitt is favored by 3.5.
Oh, you said Syracuse. I was like, what are you saying?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Next up is then San Diego State against Air Force. I kind of previewed this a wee bit beforehand, but I'm still kind of on the fence about this, but I think that this may be Air Force coming out to get a big win here. They've looked really, really solid. They've had one loss that was against Utah State. That was kind of an outlier because they had a really poor defensive performance in that game. But every other game this season, they've played really good defense. And I get they haven't had a very difficult slate of teams, but it's also the Mountain West. But they've still played pretty impressively in all of these games and have a really, really, really good rushing attack with Brad Roberts, who has been fantastic so far this season. 142 yards and 2 scores, 33 carries, 140 yards and a touchdown, 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. Those are just his last 3 games. So I think that he can put up that kind of play against a team in San Diego State. It's also at Air Force. Air Force is favored by 3.5 in this game. I like Air Force a lot here. I think they can pull off a really big upset. And, and other point too, I get that San Diego State does have a good rushing defense. Both these two teams rely extremely heavily on the rush, and both of them have a really good rush defenses. But at least with Air Force so far, they've been tearing teams up on that run.
Well, the fact of the matter is that San Diego State has a better rushing defense than Georgia against a team that exclusively runs the football.
But have they played teams who have exclusively run the football as well as Air Force this year?
I don't know. I haven't watched much San Diego State. I'm going off of what the numbers
they haven't.
The numbers tell me that Air Force is going to struggle to run the ball very well against San Diego State. I will be all over that plus 3.5, by the way.
I think San Diego State will too. I mean, Air Force has a top, Air Force. Okay, here's the thing here. What is the number one? What is the number
rushing defenses? But it's not better than one. statistically on paper, San Diego State has a better rushing defense than one of the greatest rushing defenses we've ever seen.
But do you know who the number one rushing offense in the country is?
Probably Air Force, because they don't pass the ball. They run the triple option.
But that still is impressive. I mean, it's
every single year, the winner of the Commander-in-Chief trophy leads the nation in rushing because they don't throw the football because they run the triple option.
Let me actually find this one thing. We can move on. I just want to hit this rush defense real quick. Yeah, so it's number one versus number one. And then here's the other point. Air Force has the number 10 rushing defense. San Diego State has the number 1 rushing defense. And sorry, let me find to compare it. And then rushing offense, Air Force is number 1. San Diego State's number 19. I think that difference is going to help them here. I think they can pull it off.
All right.
There's my case.
Agree to disagree. Always good to have some disagreement here.
We actually have a lot of games differently this week. We usually only have 2 or 3. There's a lot.
Next up, and it's because the slate is so bad. That's why.
That's true. That's very true.
Next up, we've got USC versus Notre Dame. And I'm going to go with the Trojans here. Reason why is because we saw what happened, and I don't think USC is a good team this year. They're kind of a lost cause, especially on defense. But Notre Dame doesn't exactly have the offense that's going to be able to put up points on you. And we saw what happened in Cincinnati or in South Bend when Cincinnati came into town, and they had a receiver put up 12 receptions for 240 yards, and I cannot remember the guy's name for the life of me. The receiver number 12 for Cincinnati. But let me tell you something. Drake London and Keaton Slovis are about to have a field day against this Notre Dame secondary. A field day, I tell you. This one is going to be a really interesting game. I expect USC to try to piss this game away about 5 times before they eventually come out on top, and their quarterback
would happen.
End up saving the day.
My reasoning to pick Notre Dame, and I know you've mentioned this before. I haven't really said it very much on the podcast, but I know you've said it before. But this is what I like to call a principal pick. Because this is a game where every single time that I pick against Notre Dame, with the one exception of we did both pick Cincinnati. I think we both did pick Cincinnati to beat them. Pretty sure we did.
I picked I bet on Notre Dame. I don't know.
Oh, you did? No, I did. I was the one because I know I picked Cincinnati in that game. I forgot if you did, but that was the one time where I did that. But now I am convinced that was all my luck filled up, and I just think that this is going to be one of those games where Notre Dame shouldn't win and by some stupid miracle figures it out and wins, because that's exactly what happened against Virginia Tech when they had no business winning it, and they win. And so my only thing, which again, I understand that could be pessimistic of me or whatever, but it just happens. It happens all the time, and I don't want to be on the wrong stick of it. And do I think USC can pull it off? Yes. But are USC's and Notre Dame's passing defense pretty comparable? They are. There's only I think 3-yard difference between their average yards allowed.
Yeah, and I totally understand what you're saying, because Notre Dame definitely has the coaching advantage in this game. There's no doubt about that. But I just think
it's in South Bend too, a night game in South Bend.
Whether it's Drew Pine or whether it's Jack Cohn or whoever it is, the talent advantage, especially on offense, definitely lies with the Trojans. And now if their coaching can be anything up to par with what Cincinnati's is now, I think Luke Fickell is a tremendously better head coach than whoever the interim is in LA right now. But I just think that they have such a distinct talent advantage on the offensive side of the ball. I see it hard for Notre Dame to be able to defend that. And if Jack Cohn is in the game, I am almost locking this one up.
So this one is next up is NC State against Miami, and this is a game where I feel weird about this game, because for some reason I only see NC State favored by 3, which frankly is kind of surprising given how really not good since Miami's been. Now, these teams actually average the exact same points per game, but the defense for Miami has been far worse than NC State's this season. Way worse of a defense. The offenses really are very, it's actually shocking how comparable these offenses are. They average nearly the exact same amount passing. They average only 5 yards different rushing per game. These teams offensively are really similar, but defensively is where it's a totally different game. Miami has absolutely no defense, and I don't know how NC State would lose this game, honestly, which I knock on wood, but I am pretty confident in NC State here.
I'm going with that too. I mean, I think Boston College is probably a better team than Miami this year, and NC State was able to handle them last week, which we had a pick fight last week, and I won that particular round of the pick fight.
I got the Ole Miss game though. You were very confident about Tennessee. I got the Ole Miss one there.
You know what? But I was about 3 plays away from being right on that game, so I'm not going to hold that one against myself. And
true.
And yeah, that's all. We've talked enough about Tennessee Ole Miss for today. Speaking of Tennessee Ole Miss, this game is not going to be nearly as fun, and it's not going to be at Neyland Stadium where people can throw trash on the field. It's going to be in Bryant-Denny, where every year on the 3rd Saturday of October, the Vols line up against I don't know how to describe this other than like a father-son relationship. It's like lining up in a boxing match against your dad, but also if your dad was Mike Tyson.
That's a great way to word that. Yeah, I have Alabama pretty clearly in this game. Not really much to say here.
Yeah. Tide are gonna
Next up, we have West Virginia against TCU. Oh man, I am so tired of TCU just being themselves this year, which I know we've already had our rant. We've already talked about, but these teams are actually pretty comparable given the fact that West Virginia has also had a wildly disappointing season, but it's at home, and I hesitantly think that TCU will pull this out. I'm very anti-confident about TCU anymore, but I think it's also showing in the Texas Tech game that when we play teams that really aren't that good, our offense can sort of run wild. And I think that with that, we can be okay. Because West Virginia's defenses I know our defense is horrid.
Yes.
But I think we have enough offense to win this game. Because that's what happened with Texas Tech. We won by just pushing offense as hard as we could down their throats. And I think that may be how this game's going to have to go.
Well, West Virginia is throwing the ball pretty well. I think they will be able to move the ball through the air, but we've talked about the weakness of this TCU defense is the fact that they give up 210 yards a game in rushing, which is horrendous. However, do you want to know who has the worst rushing offense in the Big 12? And it's not Texas Tech, it's not Kansas, and it's not K-State.
Wow,
would be the Mountaineers of West Virginia, who are actually running the ball for 30 yards less than Kansas a game.
God.
So that's a good sign for TCU. And like you said, we've seen how TCU is able to kind of use their talent and use their offense and use their outdated coaching schemes to beat up on some of these poorer coached, not quite as talented teams in the Big 12. And I think you can put West Virginia right up there with Texas Tech in terms of poor coaching and not enough talent on the field. And remind you, Texas Tech is coached by none other than Sonny Cumbie on offense.
God. Don't even get me started on him. But
oh boy. Okay.
Yeah, let's move on. I don't even need to get into him. Next game up.
Worms right up.
Next game up is the one team in the country that has to play Clemson, Notre Dame, and Georgia in the same season, because of course we do. And I get that's not as difficult as it was preseason, where preseason it was hell, but now it's not as bad. And it's Georgia Tech, and they're playing against Virginia, and it's in Charlottesville, and it's a night game, and we're going to lose.
I'm going to defer to you on this because it's kind of I'm this close, and I said this last week, I'm still on the razor's edge from just boycotting the ACC altogether. because the two best teams in the conference are Pitt and Wake Forest. And I don't think either of them are particularly good in the national scale of things. So I will defer to you on this particular bottom of the barrel ACC game. I'm also going to go with the Cavs. But let's wrap up with another, I'm so sorry, bottom of the barrel ACC game. We got Cuse headed to Neyland Stadium in Blacksburg to take on the Virginia Tech Hokies, coached by Justin Fuente, who I'm not sure will be there for that much longer. If you had to say over under a year and a half, where would you go on that as far as Justin Fuente's tenure in Blacksburg?
It depends on how this season ends. It's been pretty sad so far, given that there was a lot of hype on Virginia Tech finally coming out and winning this division, but it looks like it's Pitt's to lose. Virginia has a slight chance. They obviously have to win this week, but VT is looking pretty pathetic. It's only 1-1 though. That's the other thing. They're only at 1-1 in the conference. So if they can win some more conference games, they can maybe stand to get in a little bit. But Syracuse is, as I will claim, the best worst team. If you want to talk about a team that really is not very good on paper, but if you watch them in a game, it's a shocking difference. And so, Syracuse just has games that they're winnable, that they refuse to win. And Virginia Tech more wins pretty easily or gets kind of smoked. And so both these teams are 3-3. It's a really weird game. It's really hard to, 3-4 is Syracuse, 3-3 Virginia Tech. But I'm just going to make the claim that Virginia Tech's going to win this game, but Syracuse is going to probably look like the better team the majority of the game and find some way to lose. That's what I think, which is sad and pessimistic. That's what I think.
You are predicting that Syracuse covers.
I honestly, at this point, well, what's the spread too? What do you have for that?
3.5. The tight one.
If we lose our fourth game in a row by 3, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know if I can take that.
Well,
and it might happen.
I am also going to pick Syracuse, but I am going to go ahead and cash. I mean, I'm also going to pick Virginia Tech. Why did I say Syracuse?
I was like,
but I am also going to go ahead and cash in my Dino Babers always covers ticket for this week. And I will
free space on bingo.
And I will. Well, here's the thing: I'm not going to take it this week. I feel like it's been working too well. Eventually, in one of these tight spread games, Dino Babers is not going to cover, and I think it might be this one. And I think it might be close, too. I think it might be 5 as opposed to 3.
Yeah, and next game's up for Q's is Boston College at Louisville, at NC State, and Pittsburgh. I'm actually covering 3 of those games. I'll cover Boston College and Pitt at home, and then I already have a plane ticket and a hotel booked, so I'm going to be covering the Louisville game in Kentucky, which will be pretty fun. But not uber confident, but it'll be a fun game and a cool experience. I know Cardinal Stadium's a fun time. That's the night that they are retiring Lamar Jackson's jersey. Happens to be the game I'll be going to, so that'd be kind of cool to see that happen. So
yeah, that'll be super cool.
So send on there, but yeah, I think it'd be fun. But
that will be it for this episode of the Blanket Coverage Podcast. Thanks so much if you're tuning in or listening. You can catch us later this week as we talk about the National Football League. Certainly an interesting week. Tighten up. Got a big win that I was very happily wrong about against the Bills in Nashville on Monday night. So for now, once again, thank you so much for listening. I am Noah Parker.
And I'm Jack Wallace.
Peace out, y'all.